The Hebrew University has accomplished truly amazing things, and its community of researchers continue to contribute to humans' ability to cope with the coronavirus. Our reality has been radically altered, and some changes are likely to remain for many years to come. I am honored to introduce a leading expert in analyzing historical, human, and social processes. He is an Israeli historian and a professor in the Hebrew University's Department of History, Professor Yuval Noah Harari. Professor Harari's books, including *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, *Homo Deus: A Brief History of Tomorrow*, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, have been translated into over 60 languages and have sold more than 27 million copies worldwide. He is considered an expert in his field and is sought by media outlets worldwide. Join me on a short trip to Professor Yuval Noah Harari's office in Tel Aviv to discuss our collective future. Professor Yuval Noah Harari, thank you very much for allowing us to hold this interview in your beautiful office in Tel Aviv.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to host you here and to host everybody else virtually in this meeting.
Yes, this is your academic home in Jerusalem, actually. And I wonder, in this time of the pandemic, the COVID-19 global pandemic, did your work is changing right now, the way you think and the project that you develop?
Yes, I've been in the Hebrew University. I came as a student in 1993 and later as a lecturer. So it's been my home, the Hebrew University, for most of my life, really. I've been there. And this home remained relatively the same. I mean, the entire world was changing, but this home was very kind of stable and the same. And 2019, I would come into the same class that I entered as a first-year student, and I could imagine it's still 1993, in a good way, not in a bad way. Some things in life, are stable and kind of warm and welcoming. And then, in a couple of weeks, everything just became completely chaotic. That the term was supposed to begin I was teaching 3 courses, supposed to begin March 2020, and within a week or two, everything moves online. And I had to reinvent everything, really. I mean, it's so difficult to kind of read the atmosphere of the class when everything is online. I explain something, I can't really tell whether the students understood or didn't understand. Are they following me? Have I lost them? I tell a joke, I don't know if they laughed or smiled. So I find at the end of the class, I'm also physically exhausted because I have to be far more alert and all the time looking for tiny clues and signs to what's happening with the students, what's happening with the class. And it's the same with other things I do, like public events or interviews. Before COVID-19, so everybody demanded if I'm giving an interview for American TV or I'm doing some event in China, I obviously must travel there in person. So it's the airplanes, the airports, the hotels, everything. And it was unthinkable to say to them, well, maybe I'll just do it from home via a screen online. And now it's standard. So it had advantages and disadvantages.
You think it might change the kind of project you're developing, or actually the way you think or the way you prepare yourself to the next semester, for example, in Jerusalem?
Yes, I mean, I have to rethink the way that I teach classes and prepare them. It's already happened in the previous semester. I taught 3 classes, and I kind of had to reinvent the way the class is organized and also the material that I'm teaching, because it's a different medium. You demands that you also change some of the content. It's not all bad. There were advantages. For instance, the fact that in a click of a button, I can divide the class into small discussion groups. This was a wonderful tool. that I just raise a question and I press a button and they automatically find themselves in these small discussion rooms of 5-6 students, and everybody talks and I can move between the rooms. It gives both them and me some kind of break from the normal way the class is run, and also it gives an opportunity for everybody to even, you have these quiet students who never say a word in class, but in this small discussions group, everybody is talking. And this is something that the technology actually makes easier, because in a physical class, if I wanted to do that, then it would take a lot of time just to decide who goes into which group. And also there is just no space. I mean, the class is not big enough physically to have these small groups.
But from the other hand, distance education might increase social gaps because of the need for technological equipment. And I wonder how you see the future of the further education or the future of universities in the next decade.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on the decisions we make. The technology is not deterministic. You can use the same technology to create very different kinds of educational systems. There are a lot of choices to be made. We've been discussing all this online teaching for years and have been doing very little. And suddenly, within a few weeks, we changed the entire way that the university, what it means.
What are the dangers of this effect?
There are many dangers ranging from the experience of the students. I'm thinking about, say, a new student, first year, just entering university now, and the whole experience of university, of meeting other students and sitting together after class in the cafeteria and having a lively discussion about whatever. And in many cases, the most important discussions are in the cafeteria, between the students, after class is over, not in the classroom itself. And how do you provide that? I mean, this is not something you can do on Zoom. So this is one very big issue, that thinking about it, realizing that university is not just about academic studies, it's also about social connections. That's something very important. There are also economic and structural issues.
Yes.
For instance, when everything is online and everything is recorded, it can have a huge impact on the status of lecturers. For instance, what's to stop the university to just, record the class once and then fire the lecturer, especially if she or he are just a temporary job, and then just using the recording. If it's an advanced seminar in Chinese philosophy, it's probably difficult. But if it's an introductory course, then you can just use the recording. And then what happens to the status of the social security of the staff? Another thing, if everything is online, you don't even need to hire the staff in Israel. I mean, why, if you're teaching some online course in computer science to 100 students via Zoom, why should the professor be in Jerusalem or in Eilat?
And why should I sign up to the Jerusalem?
Oh, why should you sign up for the Jerusalem course? Yes, I mean, basically, you can just have the professor in Bangalore or some other place, maybe pay 10% of what you pay in Israel, have no social benefits, and that's something that needs to be really thought about deeply, about the changing structure of the academic job market and the consequences for the university.
In this changing structure, what are the skills we need in order to cope and to function well in the future? I think about the children, of course, we talk about the students that are facing huge global changes in all aspects of life.
The thing is, nobody has any idea how the world and the job market would look like in 20 or 30 years. And this is really an unprecedented situation. Never before in history we were in a situation when nobody, not even the experts, could tell you what the job market would look like in 20 years, what jobs will be available, and what skills will be necessary. There will be jobs. I don't think that automation and AI will just destroy all the jobs. They will destroy a lot of jobs, but they will create a lot of new jobs, and they will change also a lot of professions. The thing is, we can't really predict the nature of these changes, so we also don't know which skills people will need. The only thing we are certain about is that the job market will be extremely volatile. We are not talking about a one-time revolution. It's not like you have the big automation revolution of 2025. Lots of jobs disappear, a lot of new jobs emerge. You have a couple of rough years. Everybody needs to kind of get their act together again. But after a few years, everything settles down into some new normal. That's not going to happen because the AI revolution is just beginning. We haven't seen anything yet. So we are entering into a prolonged revolutionary process, really a cascade of ever bigger disruptions. So you will have a big AI revolution by 2025, but an even bigger one by 2035, an even bigger one by 2045. So people will have to retrain and reinvent themselves many, many times. The idea that as a young person, whether in school or in university, you learn a profession, you acquire certain skills, and then you use them for the rest of your life, this is dead. This is completely outdated. Of course, people always needed to keep learning throughout their lives and gain experience, but we are talking about something which is really a fundamental change, that people will have to reinvent themselves repeatedly every 10 years or so. Maybe you need to relearn a profession from scratch because your old profession is just gone, and there is a new need, but in something else, which means that university would, or some kind of educational system, will have to focus on lifelong learning. And the skills that you give people, it's above all the ability to keep learning, to keep changing, and to reinvent yourself. And this stresses not technical skills, because technical skills will come and go. It stresses kind of deeper psychological abilities to maintain a mental flexibility throughout your life.
Some kind of an antibody technology invasion.
Yes, I mean, when you're 20, your job in life is kind of to invent yourself. Who am I? And that's difficult even when you're 20. But think about doing it again when you're 30, doing it again when you're 40 and 50, and life expectancy is likely to rise, and pension age is likely also to be pushed up. So we need to think about our students and about young people in general facing tremendous psychological stress, both because the future is completely unknown. Unlike previous generations, they couldn't ask the elders, whether they're parents or grandparents or professors, how would the world look like when I'm 50? Nobody has an idea how the world would look like when you're 50. The only thing we can tell you that you will be under tremendous pressure to keep changing and reinventing yourself. The kind of fantasy of reaching a point when you can just relax. That's it. You've got it.
It's over.
It's over. And that's extremely scary, and that's true in all professions. So, whether you're going to study philosophy or computer science, you will need this kind of psychological flexibility and resilience. So this should be a premium. And again, maybe in 20 years it will turn out that the people who went to study philosophy actually made a better bet in terms of the job market than those who went to study computer science, because coding, that's easy, that's AI can do. But Google will need a lot of philosophers because we are already seeing it.
The moral questions.
The moral questions, questions that for thousands of years were theoretical questions for philosophers that they could discuss and discuss endlessly, and they had very little practical implications. Suddenly, these questions are becoming practical engineering questions, like this entire discussion about free will and self-driving vehicles. And to have a self-driving vehicle on the road, you need a vehicle to make ethical decisions. That's very, very obvious.
You need to code the algorithm to tell him.
So all these corporations are coding the self-driving vehicle and manufacturing it. They are likely to need more and more philosophers and not just coders.
Let's talk about political issues.
Yes.
In the spring, you wrote that the COVID-19 epidemic is the ultimate test of democracy and citizenship. Can we say that we have failed the test here in Israel?
In Israel, it seems that we won't be getting a very high mark on this test. I mean, the basic fuel of a democracy is trust. Trust between the population and the government, both ways. Government trusting the population, population trusting the government, the authorities. A dictatorship can function with a limited amount of trust. That's fine.
They have power.
But a democracy needs trust. And we don't have it. We've lost it, largely, I would say, because of the actions and failings of the previous and current government, which have systematically eroded the trust of the public in the authorities. We still have a prime minister who for years have been relentlessly attacking the media, the universities, the police, the courts, and telling people don't believe them. Don't believe these authorities. And now you have a crisis and people don't believe. So what can you expect? And you see that seeds that have been planted for years of deliberately creating divisions within society as a political strategy to, divide and rule. That's a very old strategy, divide and rule. And it has a price that when you have, yes, you can rule by dividing people, but then when you have a crisis like COVID-19, you can't deal with it because, like in ordinary times, you can govern a democratic country with the support of, say, half the population. That's enough. 50% plus one, it's enough. But in a crisis like this, you can't manage the crisis when half the population don't believe a single word you're saying. Yes, maybe some people worship you, and if you say the sun rises in the west every day and sets in the east, they will believe you. But the other 50%, they don't believe a single word you say, and you just can't manage a crisis like this in such a situation. Other democracies are doing much, much better. I don't think that there is an inherent problem with the democratic system. We see that around the world, many democratic countries have been dealing with COVID-19 in an admirable way.
So you're saying Israel is not dealing it as a democracy anymore, and I wonder if you pay the price because you're saying those kind of things.
I think I'm kind of protected. I have a strong enough international position that I'm protected, but many members of the academic community, they are in a much, much weaker situation.
They're afraid to speak?
They're afraid to speak. And we've seen over the last years in Israel that academic freedom is eroding. And, speaking about the current prime minister, at present, the main challenger to the current prime minister is somebody who is an education minister thought to install the so-called ethical code, which is really meant to curb academic freedom of expression and to police and monitor even what scholars are saying in the classrooms, in the university. So I don't see much hope coming from that direction. And you just need to look around the world in countries such as, Hungary, Russia, what's happening to academic freedom there. We can't take it for granted that Israel is immune from these processes.
Is there a way to revive the democracy here in Israel? Another election might be a disaster as well.
I'm not a politician, and I'm not a political scientist, and I'm certainly not an expert on Israeli society. So I don't know what needs to be done specifically, but more generally speaking, and this is true of many countries, not just of Israel, As I said, unlike dictatorships, democracies need trust. And they need, I would say, a strong sense of nationalism, but not in the wrong-headed way that nationalism is often understood today. Many people think that nationalism means hating foreigners and hating minorities. The more I hate foreigners and minorities, the more patriotic I am. We have many leaders around the world who are conveying this kind of message, and it's a complete mistake. Nationalism is not about hating foreigners, it's about loving your compatriots. And many of the leaders who present themselves as nationalists and patriots, they are the exact opposite. They incite not only hatred of foreigners, they incite internal hatreds. They depict their political opponents not as legitimate rivals within the democratic game, but as enemies and traitors. And this ruins democracy. Democracy, to function, needs a strong sense of good nationalism. That my political opponents, I don't agree with them, I think they are wrong, but they are not my enemies, they are not traitors, and if I am elected to office, I take care of their interests, not just the interests of my camp. And we need to see more of this kind of healthy patriotism, which manifests itself in everything from the political discourse to basic stuff like paying taxes. You look at the US, and at least according to the latest publications, you have a so-called patriotic president who is also a billionaire who apparently paid $750 in annual taxes as president. Now, I would say that the real test of patriotism is paying taxes, or one of the big tests. It's not hating foreigners. Because, the taxes you pay,
Yes.
What they mean is I pay taxes so that unknown people in another part of the country, I don't know, in Israel we have like 8 million citizens. I know maybe 200 of them personally. So there are like 7,900,000 and something people, I don't know. But I pay taxes so that they will get a good education and a good healthcare. And that's a patriotic act. And that's, like the miracle of modern nationalism, that it inspires enough, that people care enough about these strangers that they never met to nevertheless take care of them. And if that crumbles, that, again, you not just see other people in your country as enemies, but you stop caring about them, so you don't pay your taxes, then, again, a dictatorship can function like that, but a democracy cannot.
You're talking about the US and the way the ideas of the US might collapse during this.
Yes, you're seeing, 50 years ago, Democrats and Republicans, they had their arguments, but both of them feared the Russians, the enemies outside. The Russians will come and change our way of life. Today, both Democrats and Republicans fear and hate one another far more than they fear and hate the Russians or the Chinese. The Republicans fear that if the Democrats take power, they will destroy our way of life. And the Democrats fear exactly the same thing. This is something that in the long run is unsustainable in democracy.
It's not just Trump, what I'm trying to ask.
He's a symptom. But it came, and he's making it worse, of course. But it didn't start with him.
It doesn't really matter who will be elected.
Oh, it matters a great lot. Yeah, again, you have different political styles. That's for sure.
Okay.
Nobody is forcing these leaders to adopt these divisive policies and rhetoric. We can have leaders, and we do have leaders in other parts of the world. You look, at Angela Merkel. She's not this kind of leader. She's not in the game of let's divide the German society against itself in order to create a strong, loyal base that will follow me no matter what I do, and that's how I will rule Germany indefinitely. That's not her game. So it's not kind of the only way, and it matters a lot which politicians with which kinds of political style is being elected.
The people are choosing those leaders.
Yes.
So this is the power of the people decision.
No, but it's a circle. You know, ideally, you have people forming up opinions and desires and then voting for a government that represents them. But we know it works both ways. The government has enormous power to shape the opinions and desires of the population, and this power only increases today with the new technologies of surveillance, mass surveillance, and social media, and so forth. So when the government can, the government is not just responsive to the will of the people, it can shape the will of the people. And this really destabilizes the democratic system. Also, you know, the media has an enormous role to play in this. That if the government has too much control over the media, then it's not like people are forming their own independent views about what's happening. We now have the power, or at least not we, but some governments and corporations for the first time in history have the power to basically hack human beings. There is a lot of talk about hacking computers, hacking smartphones, hacking bank accounts, but the big story of our era is the ability to hack human beings. And by this I mean that if you have enough data and you have enough computing power, you can understand people better than they understand themselves, and then you can manipulate them in ways which were previously impossible. And in such a situation, the old democratic system stopped functioning. We need to reinvent democracy for this new era in which humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. We need to come to terms with the fact that, no matter, again, this is where philosophy meets computer science and biology. No matter what you think ultimately is the truth of the universe, you have to realize that practically today we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. And this means we need to reinvent democracy. We need to reinvent the market. Again, the whole idea of the customer is always right. We just do whatever the customers want. Yes, but you can now hack the customers. You can manipulate the customers to want what you tell them to want. So this whole idea that corporations just serve the needs of the customers, this is over. You can't hide behind this explanation anymore.
Maybe the pandemic is this disruption of a world pandemic is an opportunity for a change that we might need, listening to you. Of course, after 10 months of COVID, nothing will take us back to December 19. But can we begin to imagine a new reality of a post-pandemic world? You know, the job market, the real estate businesses, the family, the leisure culture, performing arts, everything changes right now.
Yeah, we have no choice. We need to reimagine a new future because we can't go back to the past. It's impossible. Even before COVID.
The vaccine won't help us go to the past, of course.
The vaccine will help us, of course. It will make things, more manageable.
But it won't take the time back.
We can't go back. We were already in a process of rapid change, fueled by new technologies. COVID just accelerated it. Changes that we thought would take 10, 20 years, like moving a lot of courses in the university online, they happened within 2-3 weeks or 2-3 months because of COVID. But they were already underway anyway.
There's now no reason to live close to work or close to the academic center.
Yeah.
There's no, the city centers are losing their function right now.
Yeah, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored.
And the elderly are isolated.
You have not only the elderly, also the young are isolated. And we are in the midst of a tremendous social upheaval. We can't go back, but it doesn't mean that the future has to be bad. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see we have no chance, so let's do it. And we can react to this crisis in very different ways. You can react to the crisis by generating hatred, blaming the epidemic on foreigners, on minorities. You can react to the epidemic by generating greed. How do I make as much money out of it as possible? You can react by generating ignorance, inventing and spreading all kinds of ridiculous conspiracy theories. Bill Gates created this epidemic in a laboratory to take over the world. Or you can react by generating wisdom, believing science, realizing that in this time of crisis, you have to follow science, not these conspiracy theories. You generate not hatred, but compassion, finding ways to cooperate with people in your country and all over the world. Because the big advantage of humans over viruses is that we can cooperate in ways the virus can't. A virus in China can't give advice to a virus in the US about how to infect people. Mm-hmm. But doctors in China, in the US, and Israel and Brazil can come together, share information, share the results of their observations, experiments, in order to develop treatments, vaccines. And it's not just insights about the virus. It's also psychological insights, economic insights. Countries all over the world are facing the same problems. Why should every country repeat the same mistake? Mm-hmm. I mean, if one country tried something and now it realizes the economic and psychological damage of its wrong decision, it should freely share this information with other countries. We need this kind of global cooperation. We need a global safety net to protect the weakest members of humankind from not just the epidemic, but the economic consequences. If we do that, we'll be able to not just face this crisis, but face much bigger future crises, like the ongoing climate emergency and the rise of artificial intelligence and automation. We'll be able to face them much better. On the other hand, if we, COVID, historically speaking, is a relatively small crisis. As a disease, it's a relatively mild epidemic. It kills something less than 1% of mortality. This is nothing like the Black Death or the big influenza of 1918 or AIDS. AIDS in the 1980s, you got AIDS, you died. 100% mortality. Mm-hmm. So COVID is a very mild disease in comparison. It's like nature has been throwing us a practice ball. Let's see how you deal with that before I really bring out the big guns like climate change and like the rise of AI. Mm-hmm. If we can't unite as a species against this virus, then our chances against the ecological crisis and against the technological disruption of AI and bioengineering is really, really, distressing to think about it.
What changes do you think the universities should do to handle those new challenges in our era?
Well, there are many things that can be done, and we don't have a lot of time. So maybe I'll just give one very practical advice, very concrete. Maybe the most important people today that the university trains are the coders, the people who write the algorithms that are increasingly running the world. And I'm concerned and maybe amazed that the university trains coders, but as far as I know, during their studies, they don't need to take any classes in ethics. You can't receive your certificate in medicine without having some courses in ethics. It's part of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Now, coders today are even far more important than doctors. They reinvent the world, everything. And I would recommend that as part of the curriculum in computer science and in other related disciplines, there must be, it shouldn't be left to the initiative of the students. There must be courses in philosophy, in ethics, because as I said previously, the philosophical issues are now migrating from the Department of Philosophy to the engineering departments. And the people who decide, people should realize they are not coding computers, they are coding humans, they are coding society. Mm-hmm. And this is something that the university can do, I think, quite easily. Just make it a part of the curriculum. And more generally, I think that we should see far greater cooperation between the humanities and social sciences on the one hand, and then natural sciences, and especially engineering and computer science, because you can't, as long as you keep them separate, you shouldn't be surprised when the results of what we engineer turn out to be social disasters and humanistic disasters.
Professor Yuval Noah Harari, toda rabba. Thank you very much for hosting us. Thank you very much for this lesson.
Thank you.